Is your food storage going to be there when you need it most? Your survival will depend on it. Hey guys, it's JellO with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back, friends. There are certain criteria that preppers look for when they're selecting foods to stock their prepper pantry. Probably the number one thing that people look for in their prepper pantry food is shelf life. Foods that not only are shelf stable, but are shelf stable for a long time. Foods that will remain not only edible, but also nutritious over time. Today, I have a list of 25 foods that can last 25 years or more in your prepper pantry. One important thing to note is that not all these foods are gonna last 25 years as they come when you purchase them from the grocery store or online retailer. Some foods are packaged for long-term storage already, but many of these foods are going to need to be repackaged in order to last 25 years on the shelf. Stay tuned because at the end of the video, I'm going to give you tips on storing your food to make sure it lasts as long as possible. And I'm going to talk about if we really need foods that last 25 years and why or why not. So let's get started and see which foods I included on my list today. The first thing on my list is white rice. What does white rice have going for it besides its really long shelf life? Well, it's also very inexpensive, so you can pretty easily stock up on what you need of white rice. White rice is a staple in many diets across the world. There's a lot of people who subsist mainly on white rice. And it's also rare for people to have or develop a sensitivity to white rice as opposed to some other foods like wheat or dairy. It's recommended to have 60 pounds of white rice per adult for a year's worth of food storage. That can be pretty easily accomplished with 3 of these 20-pound bags. I found the best deal I can get on this is at Sam's Club, but it's almost just as inexpensive to buy these great value 20-pound bags if you don't have a Sam's Club nearby. White rice is really great to have on hand, although it doesn't have a ton of nutrition on its own. It's a great meal stretcher. You can use it to add to smaller amounts of other types of food that you have to make them last longer, stretch further, and feed more people. Another thing to consider is instant white rice. Instant white rice is rice that has been cooked and then dehydrated. So instead of having to cook for 20 minutes or so, this can be ready just by adding boiling water, covering it, and letting it sit. So it's a lot easier to make in an emergency if you don't have a lot of fuel. And it can store just as long as regular white rice. So it's something to consider for your prepper pantry. Next on my list is instant milk powder. Milk is a staple in most American diets and it's used in many recipes. So make sure you have milk covered in your food storage. With a 25-year shelf life, there's no excuse. Try them out and find one you like the taste of. In this day and age, there's no need to store an instant milk you don't enjoy drinking. We store one that we love the taste of and it comes already packaged for long-term storage. I can usually find it for 50% off, so I stock up big time when it's on sale. I'll put a link down below so you can check if it's on sale now or whenever you're watching this. We also have a couple systems we use to notify our followers when there's a sale or discount on prepping items, so take advantage of those as well. Don't forget, besides drinking and cooking, you can also use instant milk powder to make many other milk-based products, such as evaporated milk, condensed milk, yogurt, and different cheeses. Milk powder for long-term storage are usually non-fat, since a high fat content can decrease the shelf life. If you prefer a richer milk, you can adjust the richness by adding extra powder. Even if your family doesn't drink or can't drink milk, it's still a good idea to keep some on hand. You might take in people who do need milk, and it can also be a good barter item since it's relatively inexpensive and so many people will need it. Stock up on smaller cans like this one for those purposes. The next thing on my list is wheat, and I am talking whole wheat berries. Flour is not meant to store long term, but wheat berries will store for 25 to 30 years and beyond. Wheat is foundational to most Americans' diets, so it's important to have this on hand. One caveat is you're going to have to make sure you have a grinder to grind your wheat into flour. Get yourself an electric grinder so that you can start working with the wheat, keep it rotated, and learn how to work with whole wheat and how to bake with freshly milled flour. But make sure you also get a manual grinder or get one that has both options so that you'll be able to use this in a grid down emergency. There's a huge benefit to doing it this way besides the shelf life. Once wheat is ground into flour, it loses its nutrients really quickly. About 40 to 45% are gone within 24 hours, and 95% of the nutrients are gone within 3 days. So not only will you have your long-term food storage covered, but you're also going to be making your family healthier by switching to using whole grain wheat. It's recommended to store 150 pounds of wheat per adult person for a year's worth of food storage, so that's a good guideline to start with. It takes about a pound of wheat to make a loaf of bread. So a 50-pound bag like this one is going to make about a loaf a week for a year. You can purchase wheat already packaged in buckets or number 10 cans that's already packaged for long-term storage. For me, there's enough of a difference in price and quality that I buy mine from Azure Standard in these big bags and repackage. Next up is salt. Salt is actually one of the forever foods, meaning it will last forever. All you have to do is basically store it airtight and keep moisture away from it. Salt has gotten a bad rap in modern day, but it really is fundamental to human survival. It's one of the basic electrolytes that our bodies need to function. People really tend to underestimate the amount of salt that they need in food storage, and it can vary a lot, but it's recommended to have anywhere from 3 to 8 pounds of salt per adult person for a year's worth of food storage. So I tend to go right in the middle and try to have at least 5 pounds per adult person. It's important to remember that there's several different uses for salt. Besides just seasoning our food, it can also be used to preserve food. You can even preserve meats with salt. So it's very important to have a good amount of salt. There's all different sorts of salt, as you can see here, even more than I have. Iodized salt was introduced at some point to add iodine into Americans' diet to prevent a common nutritional deficiency. But it's also important to have some salts without additives that you can use for things like canning and pickling. The next category of foods that will last 25 years or more is freeze-dried foods: meats, fruits, vegetables, and dairy. Freeze-dried foods are prized and sought after by preppers because they tick all the boxes. Not only do they have a 25-year shelf life, but they're also the most nutritious food you can store because the freeze-drying process doesn't destroy nutrients like other methods of food preservation do. Freeze-drying retains 98 to 99% of the nutrients in the fresh food. Freeze-dried food also isn't energy intensive to prepare. It doesn't need a long cooking time, and it doesn't use large amounts of water. In fact, you can even eat it dry if need be, and actually it's pretty good that way. Have you ever snacked on a freeze-dried strawberry or even broccoli? They are delicious. Having freeze-dried food makes it possible to have some foods long-term shelf stable that you couldn't have otherwise. How else would you have broccoli, bananas, or shredded cheddar cheese sit on your pantry shelf for 25 years? Most freeze-dried food you buy commercially comes packaged for long-term storage in cans like these. If you have a home freeze dryer and freeze dry your own, you'll have to package it appropriately for long-term storage, either in Mylar or in mason jars. Please, please, please make sure your food is 100% dry before you package it. I have seen way too many people who open up their food down the road and find that some or all of it is no good. Do your research. Home freeze drying is not quite as simple as set it and forget it. There are a lot of things that can affect final dryness, and even if one piece of food is not completely dry, if you seal it up like that, the whole batch is going to be ruined. So study up and do some quality testing. We do a combination of both freeze drying ourselves at home and purchasing commercially. We purchase pretty much exclusively from one company. Where freeze dried food is the gold standard in food storage, Thrive Life is the gold standard in freeze dried food. They're widely known as the industry leader. They were pioneers in freeze drying their own food in order to have complete control over the quality of the food, from the farm to the can, because that is so important to them. And their standards are very, very high. They choose only non-GMO produce. They test it to make sure there's no trace of any kind of chemicals or anything like that in the food when it's processed. And they process it within 2 to 4 hours of harvest. So not only is there no nutrient loss in the preservation process, but there's also none lost in storage and transport. It's a commonly known fact that a lot of the other companies are basically getting the food that's rejected by Thrive Life's quality checks. Their food is just that good. So that's where I invest my food budget. If you're lucky enough to be watching this video when it's first released, there is a huge sale going on right now on Thrive Life food, the kind of sale that only happens a couple of times a year. So if you're looking to add the best freeze-dried food to your pantry at the best price, head on over there and check it out. I'll have a link down below. Like everything else, make sure you follow my link so you end up in the right place and get the best prices and the best service. Check and make sure you see my picture at the top of the screen so you know you're in the right place and I can help you out if you need it. Next up is dehydrated potatoes, and this can take many forms like sliced or shredded or even the potato flakes, as long as it's just potato and not other ingredients like butters and milks. Most dehydrated foods don't have anywhere near the shelf life of freeze-dried foods, but in this instance, this is an exception to the rule. Next, we have vinegar. Vinegar is another forever food. These are never going to go bad, so you can feel free to stock up. Vinegar has culinary uses for seasoning our food. If you get the organic apple cider vinegar with the mother, it also has some health and nutritional properties. But vinegar also has uses in food preservation as well as cleaning and laundry. So there's lots of different ways to use that. For the health and nutritional benefits, you want to make sure you get the apple cider vinegar with the mother. You can use conventional vinegar for all other purposes. You want to make sure you're getting some with a 5% acidity because that's what's called for in food preservation. Canning and pickling recipes are developed around 5% acidity, so that's how you know you're going to have a safe pH of your food. After vinegar, we have ghee. Ghee is a fat. It's basically clarified butter, which is butter that's had all the milk solids removed, so it can last a very long time. Fats are really important to have in the prepper pantry because they're very calorically dense. They have a lot more calories per gram, but it's difficult to keep fats because a lot of fats will go rancid. So ghee is really important. You can either purchase it like this or you can make it yourself and store it in mason jars. Next up are a few beverages that are very important to a lot of people, including me, and that's coffee and tea. So we've got instant coffee here, which has the longest shelf life. A lot of instant coffee is freeze-dried, some is spray-dried. And of course, tea. Tea is going to have to be packaged for long-term storage unless it already comes in Mylar like this one. These are going to be really important to a lot of people because a lot of people have a caffeine addiction. And besides that, they're also going to be a great morale booster and a good barter item. Another food that can store for 25 years or more is that old Prepper Pantry standby dry beans to go with our rice. Beans and rice, the classic combo. Just like rice, beans are really, really inexpensive. So that, besides their long shelf life, is what makes them a great addition to the Prepper Pantry. They have a lot of protein. They're a very inexpensive source of protein, and combined with rice, they make a complete protein. A downside to storing dry beans is that they do take quite a long time to cook and soften, and they need to be soaked before they're cooked usually. Also, the longer they're stored, the harder it becomes to soften and the longer it takes. A little pinch of baking soda can help with that situation though, but you might also want to consider storing some instant beans, just like we have instant rice. Instant beans are beans that have been cooked and then dehydrated, so they cook up a lot more quickly and don't require all the fuel and energy that regular dry beans require. If they're already packaged in cans like this, then they are ready for long-term storage. If they come in a package like this, then they should be repackaged. One benefit that the regular dry beans have over the instant beans, though, is that these could actually be sprouted and planted, and you can actually use them to grow green beans. Or if you let them go a little bit longer, they can grow more dry beans. I don't know if they'd sprout after they've been stored for 25 years, but if you plant a few every year and let them mature and dry and save the seeds, you can continue making pinto beans for 25 years. If you don't really care for beans, because a lot of people say they don't care for beans, they're still really a great thing to store. There's other ways you can use them. You can even grind them up and use them like a flour or use them as a thickener. You can grind them while they're dry in your grain grinder, or you can grind them after they're cooked. Especially white beans like this would make a really nice thickener that's almost creamy without using cream. The next food that can last 25 years or more, and this one might surprise you, is JellO. Now, it's definitely not a health food by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have some health benefits because the gelatin in it has protein and amino acids, including collagen. Not to mention, it could be important in stressful times to have a little bit of a sweet treat and make things feel a little bit more comfortable and normal. The one problem I see with the JellO is in a grid down situation, if you don't have refrigeration, you might have a hard time getting it to set up if it's not cold outside and you can't use nature's refrigeration. But if you were to drink this not fully set, it would still give you all the same benefits, and it could be a really tasty sweet drink mix. Another food that will store for 25 years or more is popcorn. What a fun and tasty treat this would be to have in a grid down SHTF situation. You don't need a fancy popcorn popper. You can pop it in a regular pot over any kind of flame. You could even do it on a campfire. A great thing about popcorn is you can also grind it up in your grain grinder and make cornmeal out of it. You could actually store any dried corn for 25 years or more and grind it up into cornmeal, but I like the multi-purpose uses of popcorn. Another benefit of the popcorn is that corn is one of the most genetically modified crops in the United States. If you're seeing bioengineered, on your food products, more than likely it's because of a corn ingredient, but all popcorn in the United States, whether it's organic or not, is non-GMO by definition. Something else you can store in your Prepper Pantry that has a 25-year shelf life are freeze-dried emergency meals or backpacking meals. If you're looking for a long shelf life though, you have to be careful and look at what brands you're getting, because we looked at some of the brands that we have, and the only ones that we have that I've found so far that have a shelf life of 25 years or more are the Mountain House. These have a shelf life of 25 to 30 years. You can see this one doesn't expire until 2051, and this is not something I just purchased. These meals have a 20-year shelf life, so that's really close. I think they would probably last 25 years. I was surprised to recently find out that the Peak Refuel only claims a 5-year shelf life. Now the packaging on these all feels pretty similar, so I don't really know why the shelf life would be so different. The ingredients are similar, the packaging is similar. I think it's more because these type of meals are marketed more at backpackers and hikers and things like that than they are at the prepping community, so they probably don't feel the need to claim such a long shelf life. But Mountain House does have a shelf life of 25 years or more. Their meals are really pretty good, and some of their meals even come in large quantity cans. Another food that will last 25 years or more is baking soda. Of course, it's not going to last 25 years as it comes from the grocery store in a cardboard box, but you can sometimes buy it packaged already in cans from survival food companies, or you can repackage it yourself. This is my everyday use. I wouldn't recommend a Parmesan cheese lid for long-term storage, obviously, but you definitely need to repackage it. You can even take the whole cardboard box it comes in and put it right in a Mylar bag. Baking soda is important because it is a leavener, so it can be used in a lot of baked goods to help them rise if we don't have yeast anymore, or baking powder, both of which don't have as long shelf lives. But the other thing is, this is another multi-purpose item. This also has uses for cleaning and personal hygiene, as well as medical uses. It can be used to treat indigestion. It can be used for cleaning purposes, and it can be used to make natural toothpaste and deodorants and things like that. So this is definitely an important thing to have in your Prepper Pantry. Next on the list, we have some sweeteners. All of these sweeteners can last 25 years or more. Some of these are forever foods, like the honey and the corn syrup. Sugar is another thing that has a bad rap, but it is going to provide some important calories and some important comfort and allow us to cook a lot of different foods. Sugar can be stored for 25 years or more if it's stored airtight and kept in a cool, dark place. You don't want to use an oxygen absorber with sugar. Honey, of course, is a forever food, real honey. It can start to crystallize over time. You can see that this bottle has started to do so, but it's easy to bring it back to liquid form just by warming it, like putting it into a pan of warm water. And don't forget that honey also has medicinal and first aid properties, so it has multiple uses. I love storing things with multiple uses in my Prepper Pantry. Honey can make a great cough syrup. It's a great remedy for a sore throat. It has antibacterial properties, so it can be helpful in wound care. Just make sure to get a raw honey, and preferably a local honey, to get the most medicinal benefits. Corn syrup is another item that is a forever food. This does have kind of a bad rap, but it is a sweetener that we can use. And of course, maple syrup. This is a wonderful natural sweetener that can last for a very long time. If you get a little bit of mold on the top of the syrup, it's okay to skim it out and just boil it a little bit, and it's ready to go again. But if ours stays sealed up like this, we usually don't have a problem with that. It's only after it's opened. This is maple syrup that we made from our trees. These items are all going to be important for baking and cooking and for morale. Sugar can also be important for food preservation, because certain things like jellies and canned fruits and things depend on the sugar partly for their preservation. Next up in our list of foods that last 25 years or longer is dried pasta. Now, dried pasta as it comes from the store is not going to say that it lasts 25 years or longer, but it definitely can if it's stored properly and you keep it dry and you make sure that you keep it so that rodents and insects cannot get into it. Dry pasta will last a very, very long time. It's a wonderful food to have on hand. It can cook up a little more quickly than beans and rice, and it's something that a lot of people really like, and it's easy to make it into a tasty meal. You can even get specialty pastas with extra fiber, extra protein, and things like that. The next thing on the list is oatmeal or rolled oats. This is another item that, in addition to having a really long shelf life, it also is very inexpensive. So it's really easy to make a hearty meal and a good filling breakfast for not very much money. So you can stock up on a lot of oatmeal. It's got a lot of nutrition. It's got a lot of fiber. You can do breakfast with it. You can do baking with it. There's all sorts of things that you can do with oatmeal. So this is another great addition. Another item with a really long shelf life of 25 years or more is cocoa powder. Now I am talking baking cocoa, not the drink mix kind of cocoa, but remember some of the other things that we're storing. We're storing some milk powder, we're storing some sugar, we're storing some salt. So you could definitely make a cocoa drink mix out of those items. But baking cocoa is going to be important for baking, to make some comfort items. People are going to need their chocolate in an emergency situation. And it can also be used in savory dishes. I like to add a little bit of cocoa powder to my chili and things like that. Soy sauce is another long-term storage food that can last 25 years or more. I keep a lot of soy sauce on hand because we use it pretty extensively in a lot of recipes. I hope you're starting to see how some of these foods can come together and you can start to form some complete meals out of some of these long-term storage foods. The soy sauce can season the rice that we had, and you can add some of the freeze-dried vegetables and meats and have a really nice Asian dish. You can use some of this soy sauce along with some of the sugar, some of the vinegar, and some other items and make a teriyaki. And this could really be used to season a great many other dishes. So soy sauce is a great item to have on hand. Another item on this list is cornstarch. Cornstarch can store for 25 years or longer. Cornstarch is mainly a thickening agent. Remember that teriyaki sauce that I talked about a minute ago? You can use it to thicken things like that, sauces and gravies. You can use it to thicken soups and stews if you need to, anything like that that needs thickening. It can also be used to coat things for frying. You can dip things in cornstarch and fry them for a nice crispy skin. Cornstarch is definitely a staple in my pantry. Another Prepper Pantry item that can store 25 years or more is lentils. Now lentils is a personal favorite of mine. Remember how I talked about beans and how you can store those in your Prepper Pantry? They're inexpensive, they're very nutritious, they are full of protein. Well, what was the downfall to the beans was that they take a really long time to cook. They need to be soaked, they'll use a lot of your fuel. Lentils are basically going to give you the same nutrition as beans, but they're going to cook up a lot more quickly and use a lot less fuel, and they don't require any soaking. So that's why I personally really love lentils. They make a great soup. You can add them into a chili. You can make a salad out of cooked and chilled lentils. You could make a side dish out of them. There's lots of things you could do with lentils, and you can actually even sprout them to get a little bit of greenery in your diet. So they're going to give you all the same benefits as beans, including the long storage time, but they have a couple benefits over the beans. So make sure you have some lentils in your Prepper Pantry. Another item with a similar long shelf life is going to be split peas. Now these are very similar to lentils in that they're going to cook up very quickly. They make a great soup, a great split pea soup. Another thing that I really like about split peas is that they can be used in chicken feed. So if you have birds, you also need to think about how you're going to be feeding them after a disaster, because if you can't feed them, then they can't feed you. And split peas is one of the ingredients that we use in our homemade chicken feed, along with things like wheat. So this is a really good, important item to have in your Prepper Pantry, and it's going to last a very long time. Another food item that can last 25 years or more is going to be bouillon cubes. I don't actually have bouillon cubes because I prefer the powder. I don't see why the powder wouldn't last just as long. I wasn't able to get a definitive answer on that. But bouillon is basically mostly just salt, which is a forever food and a preservative in itself. So I really think that any kind of bouillon is going to last a long time. It's a very important thing to have. It's a good seasoning item. A lot of spices and herbs that you could have are going to lose their flavor if you tried to store them for 25 years. But this is going to be something that can stick around and add flavor to your food. If you cook up some of your rice with a little bit of bouillon, it's going to be a whole different dish. You can use this to make soups and other dishes out of the vegetables and meats that you have stored, out of the pastas, and this is really going to become an important item to make your food palatable. You definitely need to make sure that you have things in your preps that are going to make you want to keep eating the food that you have stored, because if all you were eating were plain beans, plain rice, plain pasta, it would become unbearable. Another item that can last 25 years or more, and this is going to be a controversial item, is hard liquor. Obviously, there's going to be some households that are not going to choose to store something like this. If you do choose to store this, you want to make sure that it's going to be 80 proof or more. You don't want any kind of cream liquors or anything like that. No beer. Those are not long-term items. The world is going to get pretty ugly if there's a whole bunch of people out there without their vices. But hard liquor also has other uses, such as medical uses and disinfecting uses and food preservation uses as well, actually, if it's 80 proof or higher. It's also a great barter item. If you're using it for barter, I recommend stocking up on the smaller little bottles. And I would recommend for long-term storage, go with glass bottles, not plastic. Don't be cheap. And number 25 on my list of foods that will last 25 years or longer are Twinkies, fruitcake, and Spam. Actually, I'm kind of joking here, but honestly, those foods are supposed to last a really long time. But I think my point here is I hope you've seen over the course of this video that food storage has really gotten a lot better. We have a lot better options, and using your food storage items can actually be very healthy. There's a lot of healthy options. Things like using the whole grain wheat, things like the beans and lentils, and the freeze-dried foods with all of their nutrient retention. You can have long-term food storage and you don't have to resort to things like Spam and Twinkies. So all of these foods can last for 25 years or longer in your food storage. But as you probably saw, many of these foods aren't packaged for long-term storage, and they probably have best by dates that reflect how they're originally packaged. So how can you get the longest shelf life from your food? First of all, think about the conditions that you store them in. The enemies of food storage are heat, light, and moisture. So your preps should be stored in a cool, dry, and dark location. The lower end of room temperature is best, anywhere from 55 to 75 degrees, but the lower end of this is better. An interior and climate-controlled room in your home is best, not an attic. Cellars if they're dry, even if your food should be packaged in air and watertight packaging, ambient moisture can degrade the packaging itself in some cases. Some foods, like we saw, already come packaged for long-term storage, and that usually means the food is sealed in cans. Even food that comes packaged in Mylar, often that Mylar packaging from the manufacturer is not appropriate for long-term storage and it's not intended for it. So read the packaging carefully and don't assume. The two top choices for long-term storage are going to be glass mason jars with sealing lids and Mylar bags. Neither one of these options is 100% perfect though. Glass mason jars are airtight and they will keep out mice and other pests. However, because they are clear, they let in light, which can degrade the nutrients in your food over time. So you must keep mason jars in a dark area or cover them with something. They're also somewhat fragile, so they may not be appropriate for certain situations, like if you live in earthquake country. Some people, in the interest of saving money and working on a budget, will reuse things like soda pop bottles or juice bottles, wash them out really well, dry them really well, and store dry goods in them. That's not a great solution. It's not going to be as airtight as a mason jar. A better choice if you want to try to be frugal and save money would be to reuse glass jars, such as Classico pasta sauce jars that actually are the same as mason jars, and you can put a mason jar lid right on it. But any glass jar, as long as it has a rubber gasket around the lid itself, you can use for storing food, and it's going to be better than a plastic bottle. Just make sure that it wasn't holding something really strongly flavored like pickles. Mylar does a great job of blocking light and air, but rodents can chew through Mylar. People usually store filled Mylar bags inside another container, such as a tote or a 5-gallon bucket. But believe it or not, rodents can chew or wiggle their way into those containers as well. A metal trash can with a lid would be the most rodent-proof solution here. I also recommend keeping plenty of mouse traps on hand as part of your preps. I like to keep a mouse trap set in all my food areas, even when I know there aren't any mice. If they do start to get in, one will get caught in the trap, and you'll know they've arrived before you find the chewed through packages of food, and you can be proactive about it. Oxygen absorbers are used with the Mylar bags or mason jars to create an oxygen-free environment. They interact with the oxygen in the jar, basically eating it all up. This helps keep the food from going bad because things like oxidation and rancidity won't happen. It also keeps bugs from living and bug eggs from hatching because they can't do that in an oxygen-free environment. You have to make sure to use the right size of oxygen absorbers, and there are certain foods you don't use them with, like sugar and salt, for example. I'll have another video more in depth on the use of oxygen absorbers. I'm sure I haven't covered everything here, but I will have more videos coming soon on how to use these methods to store your food. And besides, I need to leave something for you guys to remind us all about in the comments. Tips, comments, and reminders from you all are one of the best parts of these videos. Another important thing to remember is that most, if not all of these foods do require water to prepare them for eating. So make sure to consider water for food prep in your water storage plan. It is a good idea to have a selection of ready-to-eat foods that don't require water in your preps to get you through at least a few days. But these are part of a short-term plan. If you don't have a good amount of water stored and a plan for gathering and treating more water regularly, the cold hard truth is you are not going to make it through a long-term situation. And now for the burning question, do we really need foods that last 25 years? And is that the only kind of food that has a place in our emergency stores? Honestly, if you're planning on putting any food away for 25 years, you have the wrong idea. Use your food, rotate your food. Under no circumstances should you ever buy food that you're just planning to stash somewhere and never touch until SHTF or 25 years, whichever comes first. That inevitably leads to waste. I've seen far too many examples of people throwing or giving away food storage that sat in their basement for 30 years and was never touched. They maybe didn't want to use it because it was an investment of sorts, and maybe some of it was a little costly, but the most expensive food is the food you throw away. Everything should be used and rotated through regularly, not only to avoid waste, but also to ensure that you don't find yourself in a situation where you need that food only to discover that you don't like it, it doesn't agree with you, or you have no idea how to use it and turn it into meals you'll want to eat. If you're rotating and using your food regularly, if you want to store a 1-year supply of food, you really only need food with a 1 to 2 year shelf life that you rotate through and replace regularly. However, if you have food with a longer shelf life, you can stockpile more of those foods. You could build up a 5-year supply of a couple of staples, for instance. And you wouldn't have to worry as much about a few random packages getting misplaced and being no good by the time they resurface. Not to mention, just because something can last for 25 years doesn't mean it has to. So my final piece of advice is to learn how to cook with these things and how to include them in your everyday diet, if you don't already, and develop a rotation system so nothing is just sitting there growing old. Get a grain grinder and learn how to bake with freshly milled flour. It will actually be better for your health as well. You don't have to go full pioneer days right off. Get an electric grinder for everyday use, and just use your manual one enough to ensure that it works and that you know how to operate it. If your family doesn't like beans, lentils, or oatmeal, look around the internet until you find some recipes that you enjoy using those foods in. If you're not familiar with how to cook with freeze-dried foods, look for recipes for those as well and practice. I'll include a link to some chef packs down below, which are like meal kits for freeze-dried foods. They come with a selection of foods and a selection of recipes using those foods. If you try all 3 of the chef packs, by the end of that, you will be an expert at cooking with freeze-dried foods. So store what you eat and eat what you store. I hope you can see why these foods deserve a place in your prepper pantry. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up if you like this video or learned something new. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a silver medal emoji down in the comments. And check out this playlist next for some more ways to incorporate long-term foods into your everyday life. I'm JellO with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.